Welcome back. Who is Zohran Mamdani, the Democrat candidate for mayor of New York City? Well, the New York Times is reporting on the races he has claimed to be on his college application to Columbia. He checked off he's Asian and African American. Mamdani telling the Times, quote, "Most college applications don't have a box for Indian Ugandans. So I checked multiple boxes trying to capture the fullness of my background. Even though these boxes are constraining, I wanted my college application to reflect who I was." If Mamdani can claim African American, it makes you wonder, can, say, Elon Musk claim African American? Christopher Rufo added to this. He said Mamdani scored a 2140 out of 2400 on the SAT. That was below the median SAT score for admitted students at Columbia, but likely above the median SAT score for black students, hence the advantage of marking himself African American. So that's one thing. Here's another. The Italian American community not happy with Mamdani over this. That blurred image is the wannabe mayor flipping off a statue of Christopher Columbus and calling for it to be taken down. He did this 2 years after becoming a naturalized citizen. And then there's this, as he appears to mock Jewish traditions. But the girls don't seem to care. They think he's hot. A group of Gen Zers are now calling themselves Hot Girls for Zohran. And they're selling merch. All this begs the question, who is Zohran Mamdani? Joining me now is Heritage Foundation Senior Fellow Mike Gonzalez. Mike, I think that's probably a question that many on the left are having to ask themselves today. As more comes to light about the positions he's taken, the things that he said, now that he is the candidate as a Democrat for mayor of New York.
Well, hi, Will, and thanks for having me on. I think to answer your question, who is Zohran Mandani, we can clearly say he's a communist. President Trump was right. If you look at the things he says, they come directly from Karl Marx when he talks about seizing the means of production, or from each according to his needs, to each according to his skills. That is directly from the 1848 Communist Manifesto, or from the critique of the Gotha program of 1875, and the idea of having government-owned stores. That is just pure communist ideology. So before getting into the Columbia question, which I think is a very interesting one, and I went to Columbia Business School myself, he is a communist. He says he's not. He said that on Meet the Press. Guess who else said on Meet the Press, "I'm not a communist" in 1959? Fidel Castro. And I have tweeted out the video of that. So I think we can clearly answer that question, who he is.
Well, I think, Mike, you're right in part. I think that's one part of Zohran Mamdani, that he is a communist. Now, that may go hand in hand with being anti-American, but that seems to definitely be part of who he is as well. He seems to hate much of what is near and dear to America. He tweeted out in somewhat a defense of Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the Boston bomber, talking about his Miranda rights. Right. And it's led Vice President Vance to say things like this about Mamdani.
Mamdani's family fled violent racial hatred, only for him to come to this country, a country built by people he never knew, overflowing with generosity to his family. And he dares, on our 249th anniversary, to congratulate it by paying homage to its incompleteness. Has he ever looked in the mirror and recognized that he might not be alive were it not for the generosity of a country he dares to insult on its most sacred day? Who the hell does he think that he is?
So, Mike, a communist, anti-American, and, as you point out with the Columbia story, a fraud. There are several levels to the question of who is Zohran Mamdani.
Right. Well, the other one is, and I think Vice President Vance is quite right to talk about his Ugandan background. Uganda kicked out all of its citizens of Indian ancestry for racial reasons. Mamdani comes here and demonstrates through his use of the racial categories the perversion of two things. One is the fact that our census divides us into these made-up categories, racial categories, synthetic made-up categories, and then these categories are used to tell us who is an oppressor and who is an oppressed, and who deserves to have a leg up on such an important thing as a university admission. All of that has to go. The latter one should be gone since 2023 with the Students for Fair Admissions decision by the Supreme Court. The other one, the division of the country into racial categories that are synthetic and false, also needs to go, and I hope that Mr. Trump looks into this sometime into his first term. But yes, he's using race as a lever, and that is very dangerous and very odious, I think.
That's very well said, Mike. I mean, it does expose the fraudulence of the categories themselves because, as I mentioned earlier, Elon Musk checked the box as African-American. Right. That's not in the spirit of an affirmative action plan, but shows, again, the fraudulence of the entire concept of affirmative action into these false categories. But it doesn't negate that Mamdani is a complete fraud in trying to manipulate these categories for his own personal gain. He wears race as a costume.
Well, the system almost invites that. So I looked up what his SAT score would be today, which would be 1410, which is perfectly okay. It's the 89th percentile, 1410. It's just not good enough to get you into Columbia. So he tried to use all these other ways to get into Columbia. By the way, it didn't work. He had to go to Bowdoin College in Maine. Columbia didn't accept him.
Right. And many are pointing out perhaps because they could see through the ruse of him checking some of these boxes. I mean, his parents taught at Columbia. They knew who he was. And meanwhile, he's checking that he's African-American. All right, Mike, great conversation. Thank you so much. Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain podcast for full episodes right now.